3 days ago was Taiwan's 114th birthday, as in was the Double 10 October 10th National Day celebration. And a few days prior to that, the week's headline started with what the island didn't really want to see. Starting off, a British paper naming Taiwan's the world's largest buyer of Russian naphtha as a quiet trade detail suddenly charged with moral consequences, and a world still split by the Russo-Ukrainian war. One company's purchase became a test of national credibility. And then came the second blow. The Wall Street Journal warned that if China were to seal Taiwan's sea lanes, then the island's liquefied natural gas reserves would last barely 11 days. 11. In a country that powers half of the world's semiconductor chips, that number landed like a counting down clock. Taipei rushed to reassure investors and also the common public that renewables and storage projects would buy time. And abroad, the ground kept shifting. Nvidia's Jensen Huang told CNBC that America still leads in chips, yet China is sprinting ahead in AI adoption, faster, looser, and more daring. It was a reminder that control of innovation isn't just about who builds the chips, but who uses it first. So as Taiwan celebrated its 114th National Day, its story this week is one of contradictions, global trust stained, power supply stretched, and an AI future that won't wait. Let's get into it. Hi, you're listening to Beyond the Reefs, a show produced by Radio Taiwan International. Here we talk about socio-economic issues that are faced by Taiwan and their broader impact around the world beyond the reefs of this island nation. We did mention last week, Formosa Petrochemical Corporation's continued purchase of Russian naphtha between 2022 and 2025 has sparked controversy in Taipei. During a legislative hearing, lawmakers accused the company of exploiting a sanction loophole that undermines Taiwan's image as a democracy aligned with Western partners. The Guardian reported that Taiwan had become the world's largest buyer of Russian naphtha, an essential input for petrochemical production. Economic Minister Gong said FPCC pledged to halt such imports immediately if the European Union deems them non-compliant. Lawmakers warned that the issue could invite U.S. tariff retaliation, citing Donald Trump's prior decision to double down on tariffs on India for continuing to buy Russian crude oil. FPCC responded that Russian naphtha accounts for a limited share of its feedstock mix, that alternative sources would raise costs. Still, the timing is delicate. Communist Taiwan positions itself as a trusted democratic supplier in global trade. The concern is more about scale than symbolism, that Taiwan's largest private refinery might jeopardize its moral standing just as it courts allies who saw sanctions compliance as a measure of partnership reliability. The FPCC case lays a deeper tension in Taiwan's global image. It's an export powerhouse caught between efficiency and ethics. Now, Taiwan's economic model depends on credibility with democratic markets, yes, and also that dominates its export mix. In 2024, the United States alone absorbed nearly 20% of Taiwan's total export, while the European Union accounted for another 8%. A sanctions breach, even indirectly, risks undermining this trust. The U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, that's the OFAC, has already expanded secondary sanctions enforcement on Russian energy intermediaries. A single flagged shipment could expose FPCC to compliance probes. Beyond diplomacy, here's a domestic echo. State-owned CPC stopped Russian imports in 2022. This highlights a policy divide between private and public actors. Taipei's response will signal whether Taiwan can align business practice with democratic principles. So in the short term, halting Russian naphtha imports might raise refining costs by 3 to 5%, but in reputational terms, the cost of inaction could be far higher. This moment tests whether Taiwan's claim to moral leadership can withstand the pull of commercial inertia. And just this week came in this report.
Taiwan's economy minister says the country's oil refiners are willing to comply with the international sanctions on Russian crude oil products, including naphtha. Taiwan joined Western allies in putting harsh sanctions on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, but it did not explicitly ban energy imports. Last week, a group of NGOs released a report criticizing Taiwan for importing nearly $2 billion worth of Russian naphtha. The fossil fuel product is mainly used for plastic chemicals used in chip making. It's mostly imported by Formosa Petrochemical, Taiwan's largest private refiner. A spokesperson for the company declined to comment on the minister's remarks.
On to our second story. A Wall Street Journal report this week ignited debate over Taiwan's energy resilience. This article, citing U.S. wargame simulations, warned that if China imposed a maritime blockade, Taiwan's liquefied natural gas (LNG) reserves could last only 11 days. That actually fuels nearly half of Taiwan's electricity, and the scenario paints a grim picture of how quickly the island's grid could fall under pressure. Economic Minister Gong countered that Taiwan's energy mix is becoming more diversified. He said renewables are on track to supply 20% of power by the end of 2026, compared with less than 12% today. The Ministry of Economic Affairs is also expanding LNG storage capacity and adding emergency reserves. Critics say that even in peacetime, Taiwan's grid operates on a razor-thin margin, sometimes just 4% above peak demand. Nuclear power, once a stabilizer, is now offline following the 2025 decommissioning of its final reactor, and the recent referendum didn't turn out results that would suggest it would be recommissioned anytime soon. So this report exposes a harsh arithmetic. An advanced industrial economy that imports 97% of its energy, and much of it through sea lanes within China's reach. This 11-day figure struck a chord, not just for its precision for what it represents, physically vulnerability in an era of digital supremacy. Taiwan's chip fabs, data centers, and server farms together consume roughly 25 billion kilowatt hours annually, about 1/5 of national demand. Now, a supply interruption would ripple through the entire semiconductor and AI industry within weeks. Japan's 2011 Fukushima crisis forced Tokyo to diversify energy input and expand LNG storage to 25 days of reserves by 2018. South Korea currently maintains about 20 days. Taiwan's target, officials privately note, is to reach at least 15 days by 2028, though that depends on new terminals and faster permitting. Yet resilience isn't just about stockpiles, it's about redundancy, local microgrids, energy storage, and distributed solar networks. The real challenge is, as always, political. I think energy diversification demands consensus on costs, and Taiwan's voters are wary of higher tariffs or nuclear restarts. The war game simply quantified what engineers already knew, that resilience can't be declared, it has to be built. Watt by watt. And so here is the solution to that problem.
Economy Minister Gong Mingxin says the government will work to expand the country's energy storage capacity as quickly as possible. That's after a Wall Street Journal report found that Taiwan's energy reserves would be used up quickly if China were to blockade the country. Liquefied natural gas would be gone after a week, while coal would last about 7 weeks. Aside from increased storage, Gong says Taiwan is developing more renewable sources. The government aims for renewables to make up 20% of the country's energy mix by next year. Taiwan currently imports almost all of its energy.
CEO Jensen Huang said this week that while the United States is still leading in advanced chips, China is rapidly catching up in AI application and adoption. Speaking on CNBC, Huang praised U.S. model developers like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Gemini as better overall, but warned that China's lighter regulations allow faster deployment. He urged Washington to maintain access to the most advanced chips while ensuring that global developers continue to build on American, quote, tech stack. Huang added that real competitiveness lies in diffusion and real-world use, the speed at which innovation reaches people and industries. The remarks came amid debate over President Donald Trump's immigration reform plans, which ties work visas access to a $100,000 U.S. annual fee. Huang himself, an immigrant from Taiwan, said this cost could stifle talent and innovation. saying that immigration is the foundation of the American dream. And his comments really underscored how the global AI race is no longer just about hardware, but about talent flow, regulation, and open innovation, areas where China's scale and risk tolerance are expanding fastest. So Huang's words carry special weight for Taiwan because they outline the landscape in which its crown jewel, TSMC, operates. Hardware supremacy guarantees relevance, but not permanence. If AI grows and it shifts from chip fabrication to mass application, Taiwan's leverage narrows, right? We might make the hardware, but who's going to use it? How do they find out a more profitable way to use AI? Well, that's a whole nother industry. In 2023, China accounted for nearly 25% of global AI patent filings, and that's quite sizable, to be honest, and doubled the share 5 years later. While the US remains the leader in foundational model development, application ecosystems, e-commerce, education, logistics, increasingly run on Chinese open source frameworks. For Taiwan, the risk is being locked in the middle, producing chips for both camps but capturing little on the software value. Meanwhile, U.S. immigration friction could diverge global engineers towards Canada, Singapore, or Europe, subtly redrawing the talent map that sustains Taiwan's supply chain. Huang's implicit message is that leadership in AI will belong to whoever can turn algorithms into action fastest. For Taiwan, maintaining strategic value means linking its hardware edge to software ecosystem before the diffusion gap closes. So far, we've presented nothing but problems that Taiwan is facing. And for the solution, well, maybe we can actually look to President Lai Ching-te's National Day address. It took place on October 10th, Friday, as Radio Taiwan International actually reported on the live. Meta Stevens and I were there to watch over and to make comments about the day's proceeding.
民主台湾是印太和平稳定的枢纽，国际社会负责任的一员。
Taiwan was framed as a democracy tested but unbroken. So he highlighted the island's economic momentum, 5.1% projected growth, or anywhere from 3.3 to 5.1, record exports, and the world's 8th largest stock market capitalization. So Tai's message centered on resilience through 3 different strategies. 1, expanding investment in Taiwan. 2, deepening international trade cooperation, and 3, constructing guardian mountains in defense, technology, and industry. I need to explain this. I don't know why, but TSMC is referred to as the guardian mountain. So what Tai is speaking to here is basically an industry titan that leads the economy. Okay, and he pledges to boost defense spending to exceed 3% of GDP next year and reach 5% by 2030. So by next year, we'll meet the NATO standards, and by 2030, maybe 5%, underscoring his theme of peace through strength. The president also announced plans for a 10 new AI infrastructure project to make Taiwan one of the world's top 5 computing centers and promote R&D in quantum technology, silicon photonics, and robotics. Alongside high-tech ambitions, Lai promised stronger social programs, childcare subsidies, tuition support, long-term care reform. In fact, I believe one of the childcare subsidies is a $10,000 cash stipend for every child. Wait, 10,000? No. He said $100,000 in New Taiwan dollars stipend for every child born, which I wish this happened before I had my children or my wife gave birth to our children. Anyway, his speech sought to tie industrial power to social stability, portraying democracy. But while the speech painted directions, execution will test whether these are built on rock or optimism. But I do want to tag at the end of that, as someone who has long looked into macroeconomics, Taiwan certainly has the potential, if put into the right, if capital is put into the right place, I should say, to achieve all of the things that Lai was mentioning. And just this week, the National Development Council launched an online platform under its 1 trillion New Taiwan dollar infrastructure program, opening doors for Taiwan's insurance companies to invest directly into public projects. Now, Taiwan's insurance companies has been world famous for how sizable it is. Taiwanese people love to save money, and most of the time in the forms of insurance. It could be health insurance, life insurance, or savings insurance. So the move coordinated with Financial Supervisory Commission's numbers, which aims to channel part of the industry's 32.5 trillion new Taiwan dollars. That's about just over 1 trillion US dollars in available capital into local development. Only so far, 150 billion NT dollars has gone to public initiatives. That's less than 0.5%. Under the new system, private firms can apply for certification as qualifying infrastructure projects, which authorities will review within a couple of months. Once it's proved, insurers can invest with lower risk coefficients, making infrastructure a more attractive asset class. Eligible projects range from transport and energy to digital infrastructure and public housing. So the NDC described this measure as a win-win, easing fiscal pressure on government budget while unlocking long-term return for insurers seeking stable yields. Obviously, that last line is very important. How stable and how much is the yield? Because this is not like buying government bonds. There is not a certain amount of return on investment promised. So this reform is the financial linchpin of Lai's broader agenda, mobilizing idle domestic capital. Taiwan reduces reliance on bond issuance and foreign borrowing, effectively building resilience into its fiscal structure. The insurance industry's asset pool is vast, equal to about 120% of GDP. If even, let's say, 3% of it shifts towards infrastructure, that's nearly 1 trillion new Taiwan dollars in funding, enough to reshape water, power, and data networks. The model echoes Japan's government pension investment fund and South Korea's infrastructure credit guarantee scheme, both used to turn national savings into productive investments. So this is, in a way, I suppose, not exactly a sovereign wealth fund, but a privately funded governmental project capital pool. Yet execution matters because Taiwan's insurers will need to seek predictable returns, meaning projects have to offer transparent revenue streams and clear political backing. So the deeper goal is strategy, how to anchor growth in domestic capital. Honestly, if I were an insurance company and if I could get, let's say, an average, a stock market average of 8% of annual growth, let's say by putting all the money into the S&P 500, I might look to do that unless there is a sweeter deal that the Taiwanese government is offering with this Taiwan Infrastructure Bank idea. Finally, let's arrive at the end of our conversation today. Interestingly enough, this is actually a story that happened in the early days of the week, where President Lai Ching-te interviewed with conservative U.S. radio host Buck Sexton. It drew attention for its blend of diplomacy and risk. Lai told Sexton that Taiwan is willing to help America reindustrialize and become the global center of artificial intelligence. And he portrayed Taiwan as part of a cooperative ecosystem. The U.S. leads in innovation, Japan in materials, South Korea in memory, and the Netherlands in tools, while Taiwan anchors manufacturing. The president also said that Trump would deserve the Nobel Peace Prize if he convinced Xi Jinping to renounce the use of force against Taiwan. Now, this appearance on Buck Sexton's show, broadcast to a largely Republican audience, was seen as outreach to Trump's foreign policy circles ahead of the APEC summit. Sexton, who toured TSMC and defense sites during his visit to Taiwan, praised that Taiwan's technological prowess and resolve is appealing, but the interview also revived debates over whether Taiwan's survival strategy, deep integration with U.S. industrial goals, could eventually limit its autonomy in setting its own economic direction. But this does look like that Lai is paving the way for the upcoming Trump and Xi conversation to include Taiwan on the negotiation table in some way or some form, and perhaps also a way for Taiwan and the U.S. to continue trade talks to lower this 20% reciprocal tariff that is so far being implemented. And that does it for this episode. I'm Joey Chow. For more on Taiwan's socio-economic crossroads and the choices shaping its future, let's go beyond the reefs again next week, right here on Radio Taiwan International.